our country in the area of homeland security. I cannot identify another area where I believe that the threat is greater and that we have done less. I urge my colleagues to listen to the wisdom of former Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff and former NSA Chief General Hayden. They wrote the following: "We carried the burden of knowing that 9/11 might have been averted with the intelligence that existed at the time. We do not want to be in the same position again when cyber 9/11 hits. It is not a question of whether this will happen. It is a question of when." And, Mr. President, this time, all the dots have been connected. This time, we know that attacks are occurring against our Internet systems, our cyber systems, each and every day. This time, the warnings from all across the board are loud and clear. I urge our colleagues to heed these warnings and to support the motion to proceed to the cybersecurity bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
The senator from Connecticut.
I thank the chair. Mr. President, I thank my dear friend and ranking member on the Homeland Security Committee for her excellent, thoughtful statement. I thank Senator Rockefeller, chair of the Commerce Committee, for his, I thought, compelling statement on behalf of proceeding and, of course, on behalf of the underlying bill. I think these two statements really set the table for the debate that will follow in the next several days. Within the next day or two, certainly no later than Friday, we will vote on the motion to proceed to the Cybersecurity Act of 2012. I appeal to our colleagues to come together across party lines and vote to proceed as a way of saying that we recognize exactly what Senator Rockefeller and Senator Collins said. We have a problem here. We are vulnerable to cyber attack. It's not, again, just speculative. We are being attacked. We are being robbed every day through cyberspace. And we are not adequately defended. It's as simple as that. Part of the problem, as my colleagues have said, and the challenge is that 80 to 85% of our critical infrastructure in this country is privately owned. That's the American way. That's the way it ought to be. But that privately owned infrastructure is vulnerable now to attack by our enemies. And we have to work together, public and private owners, Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, Americans all, to figure out a way to say to the private owners of critical cyber infrastructure, you got to do more to protect our security, to protect our prosperity. And that's what this bill is all about. My colleagues have described the challenge, the inadequacy of the current defenses, the work that's been done on our bill, the compromises that have been made all along the way. I thank the occupant of the chair, the senator from Rhode Island, Senator Whitehouse, Senator Kyle from Arizona, the others who've worked with them on a bipartisan basis to help us find common ground. If I may say, and I'm about to close this part of the debate and yield to my colleagues around the floor, this question of cybersecurity is again a test of whether this great deliberative body still has the capability to come together and solve our nation's most serious problems. We had a couple of votes today. I suppose some people could say they were show votes. I took them seriously. But they all involved the terrible fiscal shape our country's in, $16 trillion in national debt. I mean, I can't, earlier in my life, I couldn't believe we would come to this point. And why have we? Because we haven't been willing to make tough decisions. We haven't been willing to work across party lines to do some things that might be politically controversial, to fix a problem that we have so the problem gets tougher and tougher to fix. This is another one. Usually, even in the most partisan and ideologically rigid times, when it comes to our national security, we put our party labels aside and our party loyalties aside, and we've acted based on our loyalty to our country, to the oath of office we took to protect and defend not our ideology or our party, but to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, our freedom. And that is as much in jeopardy from cyber attack as any other source of threat to our country. So I appreciate the opening statements that have been made. I'm actually optimistic, very optimistic about the vote on the motion to proceed that will occur in the next day or two. And I'm increasingly hopeful that we're going to pass, before we break for August, a strong cybersecurity bill. It's not going to be the bill that Senator Collins, Senator Rockefeller, Senator Feinstein, and I started out with. We've compromised along the way. But, you know, Mr. President, then I'll yield. I have in my office, in a very prominent place, a picture of two of Connecticut's representatives to the Constitutional Convention, Sherman and Ellsworth. These, I have it there because these two were the creators, the source of the so-called Connecticut Compromise. Some people erroneously refer to it as the Great Compromise. The correct title is the Connecticut Compromise. This was the conflict between the states that had a lot of population and the smaller states. How were they going to be represented in this new Congress? And Sherman and Ellsworth came up with a great compromise. We'll have one body, the Senate, where every state has 2 representatives, and another body, the House, where you're represented by population. So I always like to say to people, the very institution that we are privileged to be members of was created as a result of a compromise. Generally speaking, this Congress, which represents, 300 million plus people, 310 million now, extraordinarily diverse in every way, you can't succeed here. We can't get things done if people say, I must get 100% of what I want on this bill, or I'm going to vote against it. And so that's the way we have felt, particularly, and that's why we've compromised, particularly because of the urgency of the threat and the urgency of the cyber threat, which is real, present, and growing. So Senator Collins and I have felt very strongly we want to get something started. It can't be anything. It has to be real. S-3414 is real. It will be effective. It's no longer mandatory. The standards are no longer mandatory, but there are enough incentives in here. And the very fact that there'll be standards, private sector generated, but approved by governmental body, I think will create tremendous inducements, even maybe pressure on CEOs of private operators of critical cyber infrastructure to adopt those standards and implement them in their business, or else, God forbid, in case of attack, they will be subject to enormous, probably a corporation-ending liability. I'm very encouraged, thanks again to a lot of good work done by a lot of people, that we've started today. The lead sponsors of the kind of other bill, Secure IT, the lead sponsors of this bill, the Cybersecurity Act of 2012, and the group that's been working so hard, bipartisan group, to bring us together. We did come together today. We're going to meet again tomorrow morning. And I think we're involved in a collaborative process that will not only lead to the passage of cybersecurity legislation this year that will be effective to protect our national security and prosperity, but will in its way prove to the American people that we're still capable here in the Senate of coming together across party lines to fix a problem, in this case, to protect our great country. So with that, and knowing we'll be back tomorrow, I yield the floor and I thank the chair.
Mr. President. The senator from Minnesota. Mr. President, I plan to speak on cybersecurity tomorrow, and I thank Chairman Lieberman, Chairman Rockefeller, Chairman Feinstein, and Senator Collins for their work on this very important issue, and also all the other senators who've worked so hard on this, including the presiding officer. But I ask to speak this evening as if in morning business. Without objection. I rise today to talk about loss. I know I speak for all Minnesotans when I say how shocked and saddened we have been by the loss of life in Colorado. Our hearts go out to the families and friends of those who died and to those who were wounded in that massacre. Anyone who has watched the reports can only feel outrage and horror and profound sadness. So many of those who died were so young. A number died so heroically, shielding a loved one from the madman's bullets. So much grief, so much suffering. It is just unspeakable. The one hopeful lesson we can draw from this tragedy comes from the stories of courage and selflessness that we have heard about those who were in the theater and the first responders and the outpouring from the community of Aurora and the rest of the nation. Minnesota, unfortunately, has also seen its share of senseless violence as something that no state is immune to, and hopefully out of this tragedy we can draw lessons that will make these kinds of tragedies far less common. But today I've come to the floor to talk about a personal loss to me and to so many of his friends and family and fans, a Minnesotan who brought so much laughter, so much joy to his fellow Minnesotans and to millions and millions of Americans. My friend Tom Davis died last Thursday after he was diagnosed 3 years ago with cancer. I had the privilege to be Tom's comedy partner and best friend for over 20 years. We started working together in high school in Minnesota and did stand-up together for years, and were among two of the original writers for Saturday Night Live. I spoke with Tom's mom, Jean, last Thursday, not long after Tom died. She told me how fondly she remembered the laughter that came from the basement when Tom and I started writing together in high school over 40 years ago. That's what I remember about Tom, his laughter. I last saw Tom about 2 weeks ago at his home in Hudson, New York. Dan Aykroyd, who collaborated so often with Tom, was there too, with his wife Donna and Tom's wife Mimi. We laughed and laughed. Now, Tom's humor was always sardonic, and as you might expect, it was a little more sardonic that day than usual. But his humor also had a sweetness about it. We laughed, but Tom told us that he was ready to go. He faced death with great humor and courage. Tom created laughter. The obituary cited Tom's body of work, some of it. He and Dan Aykroyd created the Coneheads. Tom was the key collaborator with Bill Murray on Nick the Lounge Singer, and on and on and on. This started an outpouring of blogging on the internet, people writing about Tom and the laughs he brought them. I was happy to see him get his due. People called him an original. He was. They called him a brilliant comedian. He was. Since last Thursday, I've been hearing from our friends and colleagues how Tom's voice was unique, how so often his stuff came seemingly from out of nowhere, how Tom had come up with the biggest laugh of the season in the rewrite of this sketch or that one, or how Tom had been the first to nail Ed McMahon's attitude when he and I did Khomeini the Magnificent, and how Tom was such a loyal and generous friend. People would always ask me and Tom what our favorite moment was at Saturday Night Live. We worked on so many sketches that it was just impossible to single anything out. Both of us would always say that our favorite memory was rolling on the floor, the 17th floor at 30 Rock. Rolling on the floor, laughing at 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning at something that someone wrote or at a character someone had just invented. This was that moment of creation. There was the laugh at whatever it was that one of us had come up with, combined with the joy that you knew you had something. This is your job. Woody Allen once said that writing comedy is either easy or it's impossible. When it's impossible, it can be agony, let me tell you. When it's easy, when you're laughing, when you're rolling on the floor, literally, when Danny or Billy or Belushi or Gilda or Dana Carvey or Jim Downey or Conan O'Brien or Steve Martin or any of the many just hilarious people that we had the privilege to work with would come up with something that just made you explode with laughter and roll on the floor there on the 17th floor. That was just pure joy. Tom was an improvisational genius. The first public stage we performed at was Dudley Riggs' Brave New Workshop in Minneapolis. Dudley's was essentially the Minneapolis version of Second City, based on the same improvisational techniques. Now, Tom and I, when we were in high school, we did stand-up there. But while I went off to college, Tom joined the company at Dudley's, and when I came back, I saw that he had mastered improv and mastered it hilariously. Now, as a writing team, Tom and I brought different strengths to our craft. Sometimes we'd get stuck, and Tom would find an object. The third year of SNL, Tom and I were watching TV, and we saw Julia Child cut herself while doing a cooking segment on, I think it was the Today Show. So we wrote a sketch that Danny performed brilliantly that is now known as Julia Child bleeding to death. The sketch worked so well that when they installed the Julia Child exhibit at the National Museum of American History, in addition to her TV kitchen set, I think this was at her insistence because she loved it so much, they included a monitor with the sketch of her bleeding to death on Saturday Night Live. Now, when Tom and I were writing the sketch, we could not find an ending. And Tom found an object, the phone hanging on the wall of Julia Child's cooking set. And I don't actually think there was one. Tom just found it. That's something improv artists do when they are on the stage. They find objects to work with. So Danny, as Julia Child in the sketch, is spurting blood, and Julia is trying everything, explaining how to make a tourniquet out of a chicken bone and a dish towel, only that doesn't work, and how to use the chicken liver as a natural coagulant. And nothing is working. She's losing blood. So in desperation, she sees the phone on the wall and turning it to, she says, always have the emergency number written down on the phone. Oh, it isn't. Well, I know what it is. It's 911. She punches 911 and she realizes it's a prop phone and throws it down, sort of in disgust. And then she's getting woozy and then starts rambling on about eating chopped liver, chicken chopped liver on crackers, on a Ritz cracker, I think it was, as a child. And finally she collapses, and as she's about to die, she says, one more, save the liver. It was a tour de force by Danny, and when I was with Danny and Tom a couple weeks ago, we started talking about this somehow, and Danny said that he remembers me there under the counter pumping the blood. Only I wasn't the one pumping the blood. It was Tom. And I remember that that was something of a union issue because that's a special effect, pumping blood. Pumping the blood to get it exactly the right pressure so that Danny could release the spurts at precisely the right time. Now, every once in a while, the special effects guy or the sound effects guy would let a writer do the effect because it was all about the timing, the comedic timing. And also, they liked Tom. Everybody liked Tom. And the special effects guy knew that Tom knew exactly what to do. And it was all about teamwork with Danny, who was also controlling the spurting while Tom was controlling the pressure. And man, it was hilarious. Now, this is live TV. We did hundreds and hundreds of sketches together, a lot of stuff that was just so stupid that it was funny. And we just had so much fun. And Tom and I toured together all over the country. I told Senator Johans, Mike Johans, my colleague and friend from Nebraska, that Tom and I played Chadron State twice. Twice. And last week we had a witness in Judiciary that Senator Sessions introduced from Anniston, Alabama, where Tom and I played. We did a gig to 6 students in Huron, South Dakota, because they booked us by mistake during spring break. And there were just 6 students there. There were 5 members of the basketball team who couldn't afford to go back east for the break, and a 6th guy who had been grounded because he had gotten caught smoking pot freshman year, and they wouldn't let him leave campus except during the summer, for summer vacation. And I think this was his junior year. And I think Tom and I played 45 states. When we flew, we always booked ourselves in aisle seats across from each other, the C and D seats, so we could talk to each other. And Tom would always get on first and find our row, and if there was a pretty girl in the middle seat of one side, he'd sit next to her. And I'd sit next to the fat, sweaty guy in the mesh shirt, which, by the way, I think should not be allowed on planes. I plan to introduce legislation on that. Now, this went on for years. Tom would board first and get to our row and take the aisle seat next to an attractive woman or a quiet-looking, slender man, and I'd sit next to the large, loud guy who looked like he wanted to talk through the entire flight. And I thought, what a coincidence. Tom's aisle seat is always next to the more desirable seatmate. And then one day, finally, I checked my ticket stub, and I saw that Tom had taken my seat. And that's when I realized he'd been doing this for years. And I said, Tom, you've been doing... And he said, well, yeah, I was just waiting for you to figure it out. Now, I really had to blame myself. Tom had played me, and it was actually my fault for being kind of a trusting idiot. But Tom saved my butt on occasion. We used to go camping and fishing up in the boundary waters, the wilderness area between northern Minnesota and Canada. Tom was expert with a canoe, and I wasn't. I really wasn't. Now, once we went up there in October. It was kind of cold, but we were catching a lot of walleye and having a great time. And there were 3 of us, me and Tom and our friend Jeff Frederick, and we had put in with just one canoe. Well, on the 3rd evening, I decided to fish from this point near our campsite on this island. And I cast out and got my line caught on something. So I decided to go out alone by myself with the canoe and untangle the line. So I'm paddling out, and I get caught in this current and start getting carried away from the island that we're camped on And I started calling for help. And now you have to understand, we are in the Quetico, in wilderness in Canada, in October. And we have not seen another human being in the 3 days that we've been there. So Tom and Jeff come running and yelling and cursing at me because if I didn't make it back with the canoe, they were pretty much stuck on this island for the winter. And I'm probably dead because I have no gear, nothing, just the paddle, which isn't doing me any good at this point. And this is where Tom's improvisational skills came in really handy because he talked me back. He was screaming and cursing, but he talked me out of the current that was carrying me away to my certain death, and I was able to circle back and get to the point, exhausted but so relieved. And maybe that's why I cut him some slack when he played me on the aisle seats years later. Now, speaking of cold, Tom and I were huge Vikings fans. We go to the old Metropolitan Stadium during the Bud Grant years when Grant would not allow heaters on the sideline even when it was below zero. Now, I once asked Bud Grant why he did that, and he said there are certain things people can do when they're cold. Tom and I were there on a very cold winter afternoon at the Vikings-Cowboys playoff game, the one where Roger Staubach threw the Hail Mary that Drew Pearson pushed off on and caught for a touchdown, and he did push off. Senator Hutchinson, Senator Cornyn, go back to the videotape. Drew Pearson pushed off. It was offensive pass interference, and the Vikings should have won that game and gone to the Super Bowl. That's how I saw it. That's how Tom saw it. And that's how the fan who threw the whiskey bottle from the bleachers and knocked the ref out saw it. Tom and I both saw the bottle glinting in the cold winter sun as it arced from the bleachers, and we were stunned when it hit the ref right in the forehead. That was not Minnesota nice. Tom and I suffered through 4 Super Bowl losses and through last season. As sick as he was, Tom watched our Vikings and complained bitterly to me on the phone later on Sunday. Tom and I went to a lot of Grateful Dead shows together, more than even Senator Leahy. Tom and I went to a lot of New Year's Eve Dead shows. This year I went to New York to celebrate New Year's with Tom and Mimi at their home, to celebrate what we knew was probably be his last. And at midnight we turned on the Dead and we danced. Now, unlike me, Tom became an accomplished guitarist. He could sit in with any rock or blues band. Tom was a terrible, terrible student in high school. But the fact is, he was a Renaissance man. He loved to read history and philosophy and fiction. He devoted a lot of his last years to his art, sculpting solely from found objects from the creek that ran by his house in upstate New York. Yes, Tom was an original. Some time ago, Tom and I talked about writing something for this occasion. But about a year or so ago, he wrote a piece for a literary magazine that to me said what needed to be said. It was Tom and his take on what he was facing. It's called The Dark Side of Death. So I decided to read from it with a few edits for the Senate floor, and I asked that the piece in its entirety with some other edits be included in the record.
Without objection, it will be included in the record.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Dark Side of Death by Tom Davis. The good news, my chemotherapy is working and I'm still buying green bananas. I've lost about 50 pounds. I needed to lose 49. False hope is my enemy, also self-pity. which went out the window when I saw children with cancer. I try to embrace the inevitable with whatever grace I can muster and find the joy in each day, and I've always been good at that. But now I'm getting really good at that. I wake up in the morning delighted to be waking up. Read and write and feed the birds, watch sports on TV, accepting the fact that in the foreseeable future I will be a dead person. I want to remind you that dead people are people too. There are good dead people and bad dead people. Some of my best friends are dead people. Dead people have fought in every war. We are all going to try it sometime. Fortunately for me, I've always enjoyed mystery and solitude. Many people in my situation say it's been my worst and best year. If that sounds like a cliche, you don't have cancer. On the plus side, I am grateful to have gained real, not just intellectual empathy. I was prepared to go through life without having suffered, and I was doing a good job of it. Now I know what it's like to starve and to accept that over which I have no control. I had to turn inward. People from all over my life are reconnecting with me, and I've tried to take responsibility for my deeds, good and bad. I think I've finally grown up. It is odd to have so much time to orchestrate the process of my own death. I'm improvising. I've never done this before, so far as I know. Ironically, I'll probably outlive one or two people to whom I've already said goodbye. My life has been rife with irony. Why stop now? As an old Malthusian liberal, I've always believed that the source of all mankind's problems is overpopulation. I'm finally going to do something about it. Tom faced death with humor and courage. Rest in peace. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
The Senate passed a farm bill a few weeks ago, pretty good farm bill. The House Agriculture Committee has reported out of its committee a farm bill, and now the discussion of whether or not we have a farm bill is a decision to be made by the leadership of the House of whether or not a farm bill should come up. So I want to speak about the necessity of a farm and nutrition bill being passed. And it is called a farm and nutrition bill because about 80% of a farm bill expenditures is related to the food stamp program. If we can get this bill completed and to the President's desk, it will be the 8th farm bill that I have had a chance to participate in. Every 5 years or so, Congress debates, changes, argues over, and ultimately passes a farm and nutrition bill, not always of that title, but pretty much of that content. This time should be no different. We need to get the job done. I understand that there are folks who want to see more cuts here or there, and there are folks who want to spend more here or there. Those are very important discussions to have. We should have a healthy debate on how to tweak, reform, reshape the policies in the bill, whether it's in regard to programs affecting farmers, the portion of the bill that receives the overwhelming share of the dollars, or as I said, that's the nutrition title. We've had those debates in the Senate Agriculture Committee. We had those debates on the Senate floor. The House Agriculture Committee has had those debates, and now I hope their product can be brought up on the Senate floor. In fact, I'm more than happy to debate these various issues with some of my friends on the House Agriculture Committee why setting high target prices, as they did, is the wrong direction for Congress to take, and how the House should adopt the payment limit reforms the Senate has embraced, provisions of the Farm Bill in the Senate that I got included. And I'm sure many on the House Agriculture Committee would be more than happy to debate with me the merits of having a more balanced approach to where we find savings in the bill by taking an equal portion from the nutrition title and the farm-related titles. We should find more savings, for sure, than what's contained in the Senate-passed Farm Bill, including savings more out of the nutrition title, as the House Agriculture Committee has been able to do. But the fact is, we have to keep moving the ball forward. Regardless of how we feel about all these separate parts of a farm bill, we need to get to finality. We have a drought gripping this nation, and that is going to be tough on many Americans, and it's going to affect every American, not just the 2% of the people that are farmers, because, you know, it's going to cause food prices to go up. But it's drawn, the drought has drawn into focus just how important our farmers are to our food supply. Americans enjoy a safe and abundant food supply. That is because of the hard work and dedication of so many farming families throughout our country. Sometimes weather conditions or other events outside of the farmer's control can make it difficult to keep farming. Farmers aren't looking for handout, but when faced with conditions such as a near-historic drought, many farmers may need assistance to get through. Men and women go into farming for all sorts of reasons. But at the heart of farming is a desire to be successful in producing an abundant crop to feed the nation and the world. Farmers have many tools to manage their risks so that they can keep producing food. They've adopted advanced technology, such as drought-resistant crops. Farmers buy crop insurance. In my state of Iowa, about 92% of the farmers have crop insurance. Livestock farmers help animals manage heat by building climate-controlled buildings. But when faced with weather conditions such as we are currently dealing with, even the best laid plans may not keep the farming operation afloat. That's where the federal government comes in. We help provide a safety net. Let me say just how that drought affects. I just read in the newspaper something put out by some government agency that said about 55% of the land mass of the United States is in a drought condition right now. In my state of Iowa and maybe other Midwestern states, on an average of about 22 years, we face drought situations that's catastrophic for crops. Actually, the last one was in 1988, so now we're having one in my state of Iowa. That's 24 years. But on average, it happens about that long. So you see the need for something that's behind the farmer's control. Can't do anything if it doesn't rain when it's supposed to rain, and right now is one of those most important times when crops need rain. So then why do we provide this safety net? Because the American people understand just how important the production of food is, and farmers doing that production, to our food supply. It's a matter of national security. It's been said that we're only 9 meals away from a revolution. If people were without food, this argument goes, they would do whatever it takes to get food for themselves and their families. And it's only been 3 years, I believe, that some places in the world where they had riots that were national problems, not just local problems, but national problems because of a shortage of rice. And that's a staple in many countries, I suppose particularly of Asia. So you got to have a stable food supply if you're not going to have social upheaval. The need for food can also be illustrated by looking at military history. In other words, food supply is very important for our national security. Now, it may be a joke, but Napoleon supposedly said an army marches on its stomachs. But we also know from modern history, if you consider World War II yet modern history, why this very day, 60 or 70 years after World War II, why the Japanese and the German protect their farmers so much with safety nets of various sorts, because they know what it was like during wartime not to have adequate food as a part of national security. A well-fed military is one ready to fight and to defend. There's nothing more basic than making sure that the nation's food supply is secure, whether it's to provide or to prevent social upheaval or for our national security or maybe for a lot of other reasons. In order to have stability in our food system, we need to have the safety net available to assist farmers through the tough times so that they can keep producing food. I've not always agreed with the policy set in each and every farm bill Congress has passed of those 8 that I've been involved in. In fact, there have been times in which I voted against individual farm bills because I didn't agree with the policy being set. However, I support to a large extent what we accomplished in the Senate-passed farm bill last month. Obviously, I didn't agree with everything, particularly in the lack of savings that we captured from the nutrition title. But for the most part, we passed a bill that embraced real reform in the farm program, that it still provides an effective safety net. And whether it's a Senate bill that cut back $23 billion from present farm program, or whether it's a House bill that seems to cut back $35 billion, I'll bet this is the only piece of legislation that can possibly get to the President's desk this year that's going to save money from the program if it had just been simply extended. And I would think that people that want to set a record of fiscal conservatism for the upcoming election would be very anxious to take up a bill that the Congressional Budget Office saves either $23 billion or $35 billion. So I say to mostly to the other body, because that right now that's where the action is and where we hope it will take place, I say we should not delay any longer. The Farm Bill is too important to all Americans to leave it in limbo. We need to get a Farm Bill to the President. And that Farm Bill is approximately 80% nutrition programs, probably benefiting most of the people that are not, most of the people that benefits are not farmers, and then the other 20% for a safety net for farmers, but also for all the programs that the Department of Agriculture administers. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander.
President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the pending quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I go into the closing business, let me just say that I had the pleasure of presiding in this body during the remarks that were just made by the distinguished chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Senator Lieberman of Connecticut, the distinguished ranking member of that committee, Senator Collins of Maine, and the distinguished chairman of the Commerce Committee and, until recently, chairman of the Intelligence Committee, Senator Rockefeller of West Virginia. And I simply want briefly to add my voice to theirs and echo the 3 points that they emphasized. One, we absolutely must take action on cybersecurity. Two, it is a genuine and undeniable matter of our American national security. And three, we cannot claim to have done the job. We cannot claim to even have attempted the job seriously if we don't address the question of the critical infrastructure on which American life and our economy depend, that is in private hands and therefore cannot be protected under the existing regime in place protecting our government and military networks. We have to solve that problem. Anything that does not solve that problem is a clear failure of our duty as national security experts from Republican and Democratic administrations alike have very clearly explained. Mr. President, let me ask unanimous consent that we proceed to a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Let me ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to calendar number 464, S-285.
Clerk report.
Calendar number 464, S-285, a bill for the relief of Soperchi Chukwoki.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the committee-reported amendment be agreed to, the bill as amended be read a third time and passed, the motions to reconsider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, and any statements related to the bill be placed in the record as if read.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate now proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 471, H.R. 5872.
Clerk report.
Calendar number 471, H.R. 5872, an act to require the President to provide a report detailing the sequester required by the Budget Control Act of 2011 on January 2, 2013.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be read a third time and passed, the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table, and that any statements relating to the bill appear at this point in the record.
Without objection.
Finally, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it adjourn until 9:30 a.m. on Thursday, July 26, that following the prayer and pledge, the Journal of Proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, and the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, that the Majority Leader be recognized, and that the first hour be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the final half.
Without objection.
Mr. President, today the Majority Leader filed cloture on the motion to proceed to S-3414, the Cybersecurity Act of 2012. If no agreement otherwise is reached, that vote would be on Friday. However, we hope to reach an agreement to hold that vote tomorrow. If there is no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it adjourn under the previous order.
Senate stands adjourned until Thursday, July 26, 9:30 a.m.
The Senate today voted to approve a Democratic bill extending tax cuts for individuals who make less than $200,000 a year and couples making less than $250,000. Also today, the Senate rejected a Republican bill that would have extended tax cuts for all taxpayers for 1 year. Those tax cuts were originally signed by President Bush in 2001 and 2003. Vice President Biden presided over the chamber for both of today's votes. The House is expected to take up tax cut legislation next week that largely mirrors the Senate GOP measure. In between today's two Senate votes, Majority Leader Harry Reid and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell debated the merits of each of the bills.